So yeah, as Rob said, I'm a senior research fellow at LCC International University. That's located in Klaipėda, Lithuania. Um, the institute has been around for about 10 years now, but the Philanthropia, the Journal of Philanthropy and Civil Society, from the perspective of the humanities and normative theory, that was started this time last year. So we've published two issues already. We're about to publish our third issue here any day now, and I would just like to, before I say anything, tell people um, if you have an article on philanthropy or civil society that you want to publish and you're a humanities scholar or normative theory, please consider us as a potential um, recipient of that. You can find our website at philanthropia.lcc.lt. So with that, I'll jump right in. So this presentation, it's basically starts from a literature review that me and my fellow editors at the journal wrote for the inaugural issue. It was Humanities and Normative Theory and the Study of Philanthropy, a literature review of research from 1998 to 2023 and beyond. So Julianna, Giannoutsou, and Andrew Williams, they're co-editors with me on the journal, and they're also professors at the LCC University. Now, so that was what the basis of this paper was, but now I've gone a little bit beyond that and have expanded the scope of the literature review a bit, and also developed a kind of a philosophical historical lens on it as well. So key elements of the literature review. So the first thing was to look at humanities and normative theory scholarship on philanthropy and civil society within the major journals of in the field. And just for people who might not be familiar with normative theory, that basically political theory and ethics are the kind of the big fields of normative theory, but there's also some aspects of religious studies and anthropology and some other disciplines that kind of share in normative theory as well. So anyway, our first objective was to look at the major journals within the field, and then survey other literature in the field, and then in the scholarly literature more generally, which is to say outside of the field of philanthropic studies. There's kind of a canon of the field, and we wanted to get outside of that bubble and see what was happening more generally. A big part of this literature review involved definition of terms. Of course, how you define a term is going to have a very key determining factor on what you look for. And so our definition of philanthropy and civil society is perhaps a little more different than what you would encounter in for perhaps Lester Salomon, who considers philanthropy private giving to public purposes. Our kind of official masthead is philanthropy, um, private action for the public good. And so you get or voluntary action for the public good, sorry. So you get a little more normative elements such as voluntariness and the nature of the good and that sort of thing. But read up in the literature review, and it'll give you a much more comprehensive look. The third was our methodology. You know, as opposed to, say, the social sciences, we didn't really find that there is a very comprehensive humanities database, scholarly database out there that could be used for a literature review of this nature. Never even mind normative theory. And then also just the nature of scholarship within the humanities. It's not like the social sciences where, you plug in philanthropy and civil society and see what comes up, because well, humanities scholars, they tend to be a little eccentric in the way they name things, and it doesn't necessarily follow some nomenclature that is widely recognized or something like that. So Our methodology involved what's called discovery and systematic processes, which is basically, our combined knowledge of the three authors, having all three gone through the School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, doing PhD studies, things that we've come across in our personal scholarship, and then some systematic processes as well. But I'm told that this can hold water in a more wide scholarly community. Okay, so of the journals we looked at, NVSQ, journals of the field, that is, NVSQ is really kind of the 800-pound gorilla. It was founded in 1972 and is now the premier journal of philanthropy and nonprofit studies in the field. And what I've done here in this graph, I've surveyed all of the literature in that journal back to its founding in 1972, and then kind of worked out the percentage of articles that are of normative theory and humanities. So you can see that it started out here under David Horton Smith, a very high percentage, presumably because he's introducing the field and he wants to have a kind of a broad theoretical basis for the discussion. David was a social scientist, he was a sociologist, but he appreciated very much the necessity of having a uh, grounded theory and what you were discussing. Another thing I just wanted to point out here, usually, so I've got the eras divided up according to editorship. And so what usually happens is that the editor, his tenure ends, but his influence goes about a year or so beyond the time. So, for instance, in 1992, there's a kind of a little spike in the normative theory and humanities articles that appear. That's more John Van Til and Kara Milofsky. But also, I want you to just look at this 1995 number where there was a huge spike, because this will become important a little later on. This was revolved around a special issue that NVSQ did in 1995 that was organized by John Van Til, but it was basically an inventory of all the major theories of the field. They had a special um, how to say, Arnova conference in Toronto that year. Arnova is kind of like the parent company of NVSQ, I guess you would say. But that's a general view of NVSQ over the past 50 years. Um, as you can see, there's there's spikes now and then, usually associated with special issues. Like for instance, in 2001, there was a issue that looked at the history of philanthropy. That was organized by David Hammack, a result of some funding that Arnova and NVSQ had obtained to get some history scholars. And then under Dwight and Burlingame, Wolfgang Bielefeld, there was another kind of little spike there. Um, After that, though, there was just a total drop off to basically one or two articles a year that appeared in NVSQ. And Jeff Brudney and Famita Handy, Lucas Mies, when they took over, they had fully intended to have more humanities articles, but it's a lot harder to do than just good intentions. A second journal that major journal is Voluntas. That is affiliated with ISTAR, the International Society for Third Sector Research. So we have, it was founded in 1990. Um, Between 1990 and 2024, there was 60 articles published total that were humanities or normative theory. And as you can see, there was spikes usually associated with a theme of some special issue that was usually with Voluntas, it was more oriented toward political theory rather than history, but there is some history mixed in there as well. And then there's the Journal of Civil Society that was founded by Helmut Anhar, close associate of Lester Salomon. And of course, he had a very strong political theory bent to his work. And you can see that reflected in the percentage of articles that appeared in the journal. I would say 90% of which were political theory. But then after he retired and handed off, that gradually tapered off to practically nothing today. In terms of other philanthropic studies journals in the field, there's Conversations on Philanthropy, which had a 10-year run, 45 articles. Journal of Muslim Philanthropy and Civil Society, which is based out of the School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. There's 14 articles there that met our exclusion criteria. Journal of Nonprofit Education and Leadership, 26 articles there. Mouse International, which is basically an amalgam of social scientists or sociologists and anthropologists who kind of wanted to address what they saw as a utilitarian bias in the social sciences. So they started this journal back in 2021, and just given their bent, a fairly high number of articles fit our criteria. And then there's Voluntaristics Review. This was founded by David Horton Smith, the fellow who also founded NVSQ, and it ran from 2015 to 2021. It had a format of basically each issue was one article to explore a particular topic in depth. And despite so a very low number of articles published overall, and 4 of those fit our criteria. And then Voluntary Sector Review, which is based in the UK and not really focused so much on humanities normative theory, more practitioner oriented, but it had 9 articles. There are several other articles in the field that are more hardcore social science or managerial science or public policy oriented. We didn't really look at those because we knew pretty well in advance that we would not find humanities or normative theory. So in terms of the total number of humanities and normative theory articles in journals of the field, we found 360 according to our current calculation. You can see the various journals that I've just named above and how many articles were published in each of those, and then also an indication of the type. So as you can see with Voluntas and NVSQ, history and political theory were very strong elements with a smattering of other normative theory and humanities. Journal of Civil Society, of course, was entirely political theory. Conversations on Philanthropy had a really nice mix of different uh, academic perspectives. Journal of Muslim Philanthropy, of course, they have a lot of religious studies, and Journal of Nonprofit Education and Leadership, History and Ethics, and then so on. So anyway, 360 articles published in the field from humanities and normative theory. Um, in terms of other journals outside of the field, we found 119 history titles, 16 other humanities titles. So, literary studies is a lot of that. 13 titles in religion, 8 in ethics, 39 titles in political theory, and under other normative theory, 20 titles. So that kind of adds up to 250 articles in journals outside of the field versus 360 in journals within the field. And now the reason I'm concentrating so much on journals because if you're looking at a field and its historical development, really academic journals are we're really the heartbeat of the field. It's where all of the kind of the new scholarship comes out, new trends in scholarship, as opposed to book length treatments, which for various reasons take a lot longer and require a kind of a bit more settled of a consensus on what the subject matter is. So this is kind of a snapshot of the field um, in the journals, which are the kind of the beating heart of it. In terms of the scholarship published by type, there's basically three types. We organized it into book treatments, chapters in books, and then articles. So as you can see, there's been a gradual increase in the number of article scholarship overall over the well, I'm going to say 170 years that we look at it comprehensively, and then there's this blip, kind of pre-1960, which there's actually historical scholarship going back all the way to the um, 16th century, if you really want to look for it. I'm sure there's more, but a total of over 1,000 items. So our conclusions from this literature review that humanities normative theory scholarship was once well representative in the leading philanthropic studies journals, but is much less so now. And then secondly, much humanities and normative theory scholarship exists elsewhere, but it's disconnected from the field of philanthropic studies. And humanities and normative theory played a vital role in forming the field of philanthropic studies, establishing its theoretical basis. So that's kind of the influence you see on especially political theory and history in the early stages of these major journals of the field, and then a kind of a dwindling off of that. And I was really struck when we were doing our research on that trend because it was so universal across the three journals that we took the really deep dives into for this subject, and it got me thinking about oh what's Thomas Kuhn's theory of scientific progress. And of course, there was a book, that very famous book he published back in the 1960s, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And in it, he kind of challenged the philosophy of science that had been kind of promulgated by Karl Popper. Karl Popper kind of had this kind of uh, incrementally, building of science. Kuhn challenged that, saying, science doesn't really progress in a linear manner. Rather, scientific fields regularly undergo periodic paradigm shifts that give rise to theoretical basis incommensurable with the previous paradigm. So, you think of the kind of the classic instance of classical Newtonian physics and then the development of quantum physics in the 20th century. That there were really looking at the world in two totally different ways, but they're both physics. And so, but in terms of transferring this over into a more general discussion, what Kuhn observed was, usually the way science develops is there's a kind of a pre-paradigm period where scientific research, if you can call it that, is not really guarded by any overarching theoretical framework. Everyone has their little kind of pet theories that they develop that give structure to their research program. But then over time, paradigms get circulated, they get challenged, they get improved and get built, and gradually they get winnowed down to theories that a few theories that people can agree upon, that fits the data that they're seeing, and that becomes the normal scientific period, or normal science period, where settled theory is used to guide scientific inquiry. Now, that's a kind of a theoretical uh, overview of how normal science develops. But Kuhn, in his analysis of it, he also gave kind of some more kind of historical markers that you can use as flag posts for the development of a field. So okay, so theory provisionally is established, initially circulates via journals because it's the most cost-effective way to promulgate new ideas. articles are usually, 5,000 to 10,000 words. You're publishing through an established publication, so the barriers to publication are not as great. So journals, again, like I say, they're really the heartbeat of any scientific field or humanities field, in that they kind of circulate the most current ideas that are promulgating out there. But as the theory becomes accepted, it becomes paradigmatic, where it's not just a theory; it's kind of accepted as a overall grounding for the field. And in the process of that, scholarly societies are formed, books are written because we have a solid theoretical base from which to operate from, where you can communicate effectively with other authors, and you can dedicate time to a big book length treatment of a subject without becoming obsolete overnight. And then education programs are instituted, and textbooks and reference materials are published. And I might also add, journals are often founded to support this normal science. Um, I have to say that this is one of the things that really got me interested in this subject to begin with. It was a literature review that was done by G. Ma and Sarah Conrath, appeared in Voluntas in 2018. And basically, they did a machine search of the databases, major social science databases. And they plugged in the keywords, philanthropy, civil society, volunteerism, so forth. Did all the things that we're not able to do as upright humanities scholars. And they came up with this. It's actually kind of a bit of an illustration in how not to present data, but I can kind of walk you through it. Basically, you have to keep in mind that this is a logarithmic scale. So as things progress toward the top, if it was an arithmetic scale, there would be a huge hockey stick right at the end of this. But basically, they looked at a few different things: a number of journals in the field, number of articles published in the field, number of institutions with um, established programs, number of countries, a number of authors publishing in the field, and then cited sources, because of course that's a measure of scientific legitimacy, is to be cited. What they did was they basically on not really any solid basis that I could see, but they assigned 1970 to 1990 to the what they called the paradigm building period, and then in 1990 it transitions into a normal science period where there's you kind of settled science or settled theoretical basis for the science, and social scientists are basically involved in problem solving within that paradigmatic framework. But looking at the kind of events that likely precipitated the creation of philanthropic studies, of course, the Filer Commission in 1973, which was a commission that was commissioned by the House of Representatives in the US. Basically, there was a 1969 Tax Reform Act. And so the Congress was trying to develop new legislation to better regulate these charities, because there was found to be a lot of self-dealing and that sort of thing, especially with private foundations. But the problem they had was they didn't feel to very good information on the nonprofit sector. So that resulted in the Filer Commission, which really kind of gave the marching orders to the scholarly community, and also provided a lot of research funding to do research into nonprofit sector and philanthropy and all of that sort of thing. Another precipitating event was the retrenchment of government spending in the 70s and 80s. Of course, we had the stagflation and government cutbacks, and there was um, basically a retreat in a certain sense of the government from funding directly social services of various types, everything from education to healthcare to you name it, and with that, a greater reliance on the nonprofit sector, often in partnership to deliver these services. And then there was the 1989 revolutions in Eastern Europe that really kind of blew the doors off of, especially the civil society research. I was a graduate, or sorry, an undergraduate student in the late 80s in Canada, studying political science and philosophy, and I honestly never came across the term civil society until 1989, when it kind of blew up the whole paradigm, I would say, of political studies, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit more. And then there was also the funding and growth of civil societies studies in the 1990s. I was mentioning to Mita before this meeting started, during the 1990 to 1995, American foundations pumped about two and a half, $250 million into Eastern European um, ins- uh, in civil society, a lot of it into education, research, um, that sort of thing, to kind of encourage this and to help stabilize what they saw as very positive developments in terms of civil society, overthrowing communism and trying to maintain civil society and democracy there. A lot of that, by the way, almost half of that came from the Soros foundations. And then, in addition to all of those events, there was also the steady growth of philanthropy and the nonprofit sector over this time, which has continued unabated. But there was also a number of academic currents that were precipitating the creation of philanthropic studies. The one I'm most most interested, well, yeah, but I'm most familiar with is in political science. And I mentioned to you my kind of experience as an undergraduate. I mean, we were still kind of drinking the dregs of institutionalism in political science, which was, basically studying governing structures and political parties and how they win power and how the state administers itself and that sort of thing, which is all well and good. But it was there was a current in political science, especially in the 1970s. And I find the classic work in this is Making Democracy Work by Robert Putnam, where he basically looked at a development that was made in Italy from becoming unitary state to a federal state, and they instituted um, something like 10 different districts within Italy, each of them having identical governing structures. And so Robert Putnam and his team went in to kind of measure the effectiveness of these different governments governing structures and gauge their success in terms of achieving governing goals. And what he found was, to everybody's surprise, that uh, societies that had high levels of voluntary association and public trust tended to do a lot better in performance of their government, even when those government governing structures were identical. So fascinating work. And then, of course, Robert Putnam went on to author some Bowling Alone, which was another kind of pivotal moment in the early 1990s. But then also in history, there was a shift from political history, the great men and the great events, the wars of history, to more cultural and social history. Cultural history, kind of looking at more kind of intellectual and artistic trends. Social history, looking at kind of more the minutia of, how normal people, lived and worked in kind of the midst of these historical events, which of course lent itself handily to looking at things like philanthropy and civil society. And then in economics, there's a shift in emphasis from rational self-maximizers to emotionally laden beings acting on imperfect information. And in philosophy, postmodern death of master narratives of objectivity and progress, and toward a kind of a more subjective ideal, and a maybe um, we're not really progressing all that much after all. There was also a lot of academic infrastructure that was developed that signaled the a rise of philanthropic studies as a field. I've mentioned a few of these already. Arnova, founded in 1971, the Journal of Voluntary Action Research, which became NVSQ, founded in 72, the Indiana University Center on Philanthropy, founded in 1987, which was the first full-fledged graduate program in philanthropy. Voluntas, founded in 1990, and iStar, founded in 1992. So here you can have all the accoutrements of a fully fledged normal science. But what about the theoretical development? Well, in the 70s, there was the first stabbings at trying to form theories of the nonprofit sector, why it existed. One of these, kind of a classic, was by Wilinski, which viewed nonprofit sector as a kind of pre-modern remnant of society that was kind of a neo-Hegelian view of the nonprofit sector, where it's just this kind of pre-modern remnant that's eventually going to be eclipsed by the state in terms of provision of social services and whatever else it does. And then later in the 70s, we get Weisbrod coming up with what he called heterogeneity theory. This is also known as the three failures theory. So the market is insufficient to provide public goods, and the government, there's insufficient demand, or people won't pay the price. And then there's also government failure in the face of heterogeneous preferences of the population, which makes it difficult for government to provide those programs. And so that results in the creation of a nonprofit sector, the organizations of the nonprofit sector that try to fill that gap. And then there's the categorical constraint theory by Douglas. The government, then that kind of, it's part of heterogeneity theory, in terms of the government's constraints on providing public services. And then there's the interdependence theory that was put forward by Salomon, that government and nonprofit sector, they form symbiotic relationships. Government, uses the nonprofit sector to deliver services less expensively than it would otherwise, and the nonprofit sector depends on the government for a lot of their operating revenue. Then there's the supply side theory, which is nonprofit sector is driven by entrepreneurs who see opportunities to create nonprofit organizations. Social origins theory, which is the nonprofit sector is shaped by historical patterns in relation to government markets. And Estelle James and Lester Salomon, Helmut Anhar. They basically came up with this theory to address anomalies that were arising in terms of their application of heterogeneity theory to their international study of civil society. And then there's trust theory, which was basically Hansman saying there's an information asymmetry between donors and basically the ultimate recipients of it, let's say the poor. And so there's the opportunity created for like United Way or the Salvation Army or something to act as an intermediary, but there's a trust element to that. So you trust when you give something to the Salvation Army, it's going to go to your intended recipient, the poor. So those are the kind of the major theories of the nonprofit sector. And then in 1996, and remember, I said way back, there was kind of like this peak in interest in theories of the sector in about 1995, 1996. Well, Salomon and Anhart came out and declared that out of the theories that have been bandied about, heterogeneity and interdependence theories appear to be the strongest based on comparing predictions flowing from the theory with observations of the nonprofit sector in the dozens and even hundreds of different countries that they looked at. So, well, what I was going to say? Oh, the settled science. So we're now in what would be justly characterized, I think, as a settled science. In fact, I'll even call it the Solomonian period of nonprofit sector philanthropic studies. But, there's a fellow I know, Friedrich Nietzsche, and he has a great thing in the gay science. The good men are in all ages those who dig the old thoughts, digging deep and getting them to bear fruit, the farmers of the spirit. But eventually all land is depleted, and the plowshare of evil must come again and again. And then there's also this little anecdote from Max Planck. He was attending university back in the late 19th century, and he was wanting to go into physics, and he was kind of wardened away from it by his instructors, his thesis advisors. They're like, well, physics is already pretty well dead end game. There's just a few little things that need perfecting here and there, but overall, it's you know got about the same status as geometry in terms of its fixity and stability. And of course, Max Planck went on to develop one of the he's one of the major developers of quantum theory, which completely upended classical physics. Um, so what I want to say though is, if we follow Friedrich Nietzsche, this is it's not a question of if there's going to be a how to say a scientific revolution in philanthropic studies. It's just a question of when, and when is that going to happen? Well, we could probably limp on for a very long time in the current paradigm. Um, but oh, and then I've got the Kuhn paradigm cycle here. So I mean, there's actually an entry part here where there's a pre-scientific period, and then you go into normal science, and then there's model drift, model crisis, model revolution, and then paradigm shift. Um, so we're probably somewhere in the model drift part of the cycle right now, but eventually we're going to make it around and probably have another paradigm shift. And how do I know that? Well, it's the signs of crisis, of model crisis. So I've got four here. Decrease in diversity of academic perspectives in the field, particularly from the humanities and normative theory. If you don't have a kind of a constant renewing of your theoretical perspectives, chances are you're going to be in for a big shock sometime down the road. And I think the gradual elimination of normative theory and humanities from the field is a sign of this model drift and toward model crisis. But other ones that Kuhn identifies anomalies in observational data inadequately explained by dominant theories, a sense that the possibilities of the current paradigm have been exhausted, and decreased academic interest in the field generally. So that was those were my kind of signposts for where we are with the field of philanthropic studies. And then I also just wanted to kind of throw out, what are if there is to be a crisis in the field, are there any kind of potential new approaches that we might consider? Well, I would think that I mean, the kind of the classical philanthropic studies of Lester Salomon and Helmut Anhar, I mean, they're very focused on objective data and that sort of thing, empirical. But I think there might be room in the field for more subjective approaches, kind of in the same way that history went from, kind of the classical history to cultural and social history. Uh, uh, and then other approaches, culturally embedded in particular versus abstract and universal, kind of saying more or less the same thing. More nuanced understanding of power dynamics. I find there's a very truncated understanding of power. in current discussions, between the oppressed and oppressor, and that I think there's a much more interesting ways to understand power dynamics than that simple binary. More expansive conceptions of rational self-interest. I think there are a lot of very deep thoughts that go into philanthropic decisions. Paul Shervish is a really great example of this. He started out as a sociologist looking at motivations of wealthy donors, and gradually moved from uh, being a sociologist to being a moral biographer, in terms of his qualitative study of philanthropy. And then a consideration of the role of telos in social science. Social science, in a lot of ways, it kind of apes the physical science. And of course, back in the 17th century, Francis Bacon declared that telos should not be a consideration in social sciences. We only want the facts. We don't want an intelligent creator that's ordering things, that we have to discover their motivations. However, in social sciences, when we're looking at things like philanthropy and civil society that are very much a product of intelligence, or semi-intelligence of human beings, I think it makes a lot more sense to reconsider the central role of telos in that process. And then normative theoretical frameworks for understanding the why of philanthropy in civil society, as opposed to the how much and to whom and all that sort of thing. So that is my presentation, and I would just like to maybe throw it out to the attendees now, and see if there was